we have a person here that, you know, had been flying, had been moving in ways that most people never will experience in their life.
Yeah.
And the joy and the freedom involved with that. And all of a sudden, here you are clunking along, trying to walk on crutches. I mean, that had to be like going to movement jail or something, you know?
Started ballet at 3 with a teacher that she had studied with as a little girl. And I took to it really quickly. A lot of it was I don't know about a lot of it, but part of it was the social aspect of being in a group. And then part of it was the focus, and part of it was the expression, I think, as a young person, sort of making up dances a little bit. And then once it started to get more difficult with actual technique and training, I found myself struggling to put parts together. But part of that was the excitement of it, was the challenge of it. So I started to perform in a big way as a child when I was 8. And I was like, this is where I want to be. I want to be surrounded with these people. I didn't need to be necessarily a dancer. I just needed to be in the artistic world, because I just knew that those were my people. And so, but I continued dancing. I don't know if I felt like, I felt good, but I never felt like a great young dancer. I always had things to work on, always. I like to say, and I truly believe that dance is a vocation. It's not a choice. You know, you're drawn to it. You have to do it. You need to do it. If that's not in your chemistry, then it's really hard to be a professional dancer. It's a lifetime commitment. I mean, I spent every afternoon after school in ballet class. And by the time I was 10, I was going every day after school to ballet class, and I couldn't wait to get there. And so it was like that. But I had my friends, my ballet friends and my school friends. But it was real joy. And it was kind of the experience of feeling myself each day grow a little bit. And I just loved experiencing that evolution, that next day I could be better. You know, that's how I felt. And that's part of what was the joy, was feeling myself flower, even through the frustration of it all. Just how I applied things. So many lessons to learn. So by the time I was 12 or 13, I had a teacher that thought, okay, you have something. And they started to really believe in me, and they sent me off to an audition for School of American Ballet here in New York City. And I succeeded, and I won a scholarship, and I was in 8th grade. And this was following a year where the year before, at age 12, I had been diagnosed with scoliosis. So I had gone through the treatment of casting and traction, and ultimately had gotten a brace after 6 months of treatment for scoliosis. And then 6 months after getting that brace, was the audition. And I went for it, and I got in, and I had this brace on, and took it off to dance, put it back on for the drive home. And that was it. That was when it all started, really, like the possibility opened up that I could be a professional, possibly one day. I got into School of American Ballet, which is this training grounds for the New York City Ballet. And I moved to New York full time when I was 15, and I finished high school in New York, and trained at the School of American Ballet. And I think when I was 17, I was asked by the director at the New York City Ballet to be an apprentice with the company, because I was very strong, because I had spent 6 months in a 15-pound body cast doing releves. I mean, part of this is the truth of why I succeeded. Was I had a teacher who, when I was going through all this treatment and I had this 15-pound body cast from shoulders to hips, she said, don't give up, come into class. Why stop? Use your mind, do what you can do, you'll only be able to do so much, but you'll learn so much from those little fine details and figuring out the way forward with this apparatus on. And as embarrassing as it was, I mean, it was very embarrassing to go into class with a thick plaster cast covering my whole body. Everybody's in a leotard, and I'm just like the Hulk. And I was 12, almost 13. I was 13, actually, just turned 13. But I went and I just put my mind into the work. And with her guidance, she made me feel safe.
We both nodded when you talked about what your teacher said.
Yeah.
And what happened there, right? If you think about it, is she didn't look at your scoliosis as a limitation. She looked at it as an opportunity.
Absolutely.
She taught you to think beyond that, and that you could get past that. So that while you had this physical challenge going on, there was an opportunity for you to grow as a dancer. And, if you think about that in the context of providing care to patients, how we communicate with patients, that these obstacles that patients go through then can be an opportunity, and we can learn from them. And, these are the kinds of messages Dr. Weiser and I give, Sherri and I give to patients every day.
And I have to say, that really, a lot of that started after I had the traction, and I grew 1.5 inches in a week, the first week of my treatment. And then I spent, months after that repeating that and putting the cast on, and then repeating the traction, another cast, repeating that till it was solid. And then I had the brace. But as soon as my spine lengthened out, my sides got balanced. My movement opened up, and I felt like I could fly. I felt just extremely empowered with my movement after I got some length and energy within my spine. So, and that changed everything.
Wendy, you were a principal dancer for quite a while before you felt any pain at all. Is that right? It was I
always felt imbalanced.
Okay.
So I always had one leg that moved higher than the other. And I always would, pull my inner thigh on one side kind of more than the other. I just had these imbalances, these kind of sort of weaknesses. But I didn't have like any kind of severe pain. I definitely had a side where I could really embellish a movement. So I was like, yes, that's on my good side. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the most powerful points of the documentary to me was when you had that discussion about possibly not being able to do the Nutcracker for the first time. And then you spoke about how you started to feel pain about a month later. Is that right? Do I have that correct?
Yeah. I mean, this was in my 40s. So, I mean, I do think that my spine had started to go back. I hadn't been in a cast since I was 16.
Yeah.
And I danced, and I worked and worked and worked. My body started to get tired. I was working my buns off for all of my career. I was constantly working. And I think as I aged, my body got tired. It needed a change. It started to shrink down a little bit. My technique started to change. My jump wouldn't push the same as it did when my spine was longer. The muscles were not kicking in quite the same way. And I had that conversation. And then all hell broke loose and my body just gave up. And the pain started to really take over.
Can you talk a little bit about the impact of that conversation on why you think your body responded that way?
When you're a dancer, well, for me, I wasn't a prodigy dancer. So I had to do the work, which I loved, which was great, which made me probably love it that much more. So I worked and worked and worked for my experience, and I had to sort of believe myself into my craft and to being this presence on stage, because it was different than who I am as a normal person. It was a different mentality. And so I think realizing that mentality and that believing myself into was going to be no longer sufficient, I had to somehow get out of it, because I put myself into this place of who I believed I was as an artist. And that was a big part of who I was as a person as well, because it was most of my day was living in that headspace for decades. So I feel like I like to metaphorically explain it as I had to, at that point, shed a skin and get out of that persona of the ballerina and sort of land back in real life. And I was kind of terrified of real life. And I think I learned that through being a young dancer, I could really focus in this world. I could avoid certain parts of life because I gave everything to this artistic pursuit. And then once that was done, oh gosh, now I have to face real life, and I have no idea how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I was terrified.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
What was it like when you finally said, I have a problem, I need to go see a doctor, after being so in control of your body for all those years and now feeling, like somebody else was going to tell you what you could or couldn't do? What was that like? Well,
strangely, about a year before all this happened, I had started a project that ultimately became Restless Creature, which was a way to find myself into a new aspect of dance, which was more contemporary dance. So I was going to offer myself this opportunity to learn new qualities of movement from different artists, which would also offer me a different headspace. So I had that already started when all this happened. So I continued that through all the pain. It was less dramatic than ballet would be, because I could call the shots. It was my project. I could say, oh, I can't do that. That hurts my hip. And they would say, oh, no problem. We'll fix that. So I was in charge of that while the body was losing its functioning. So I had a little bit of control in a way, and I had this release, and I had this focus that kept me sort of distracted from it, if I can say that. So I don't know, that was a lucky thing that both were going on at the same time. Even though the pain continued, I had this other focus.
Mm-hmm.
Was that before or after your hip surgery?
That was before. That was before. Yeah, I started all that before. I didn't know what was wrong with my hip. I just knew it wasn't allowing me to do certain basic balletic positions, which is fifth position where you have your feet like this. Yeah. I kind of had to start just going from here, because I couldn't cross my legs the same way. And I couldn't, send my hip into the joint a certain way, because it was a torn labrum at that point.
So you felt a functional block in your hip?
Oh yeah. Okay. And with that, I had sciatica, and which I'd had a little bit at times in my dancing, and the pain went down into the lower part of my leg. My ankle wouldn't fully engage, all on the same side, and I had this crooked spine at the same time, so it's yanking everything up. My foot didn't want to have the flow it used to have, so it was blocked. I couldn't give it a full plie. Right, so I was stuck. Yeah, and I was trying to figure out how do these parts work, and how is this affect this back affecting that, and affecting the hip going down in the leg, and also my mind at the same time. So I felt like every little part of me was screaming.
That sort of like takes you to this point where historically you'd been able to define yourself by working hard,
Yeah.
training the right way,
Yeah.
Using your mind to focus, the body will follow kind of thing. And all of a sudden, right, that was, no matter how hard you tried,
Yeah.
it wasn't working.
The harder I tried, the worse it got. And that was just so against everything I'd done. It's like, but I have to try because this is
right.
what I do.
And this is like a total predicament to be in, right? So, everything I am, everything I love, everything I want to be is now, no matter how much I try to do it independently, I can no longer do it independently. And then you get to the point, right, where you say, I got to see a doctor about this, right? This big moment of decision, which I always think is an interesting problem for patients to face, right? I now can no longer deal with this myself. I have to rely on somebody else. And you make this decision to move into the clinical world. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a little bit about how that hip was diagnosed and the progression up to your surgery?
Yeah, we have an amazing physical therapy team led by Marika Molnar here at New York City Ballet. So I went to her immediately, as I would for any other injury, and which I didn't have many of. So I never had a hip injury before this. And I had actually done a study a few years back with a hip study to see if I would be a candidate for having a labral tear or an injury or a hip replacement later on. And I passed it with flying colors, like, no, you're fine. You're fine. This girl's got problems coming up, but you're fine. So I never even imagined my hip was a problem. And neither did she. So we went lightly, into it, and it's like, oh, it's your psoas is tight, or oh, it's just your flexor, or your a certain part of my hip flexor was tight. We just need to release that. So acupuncture, massage, and nothing was really letting it go. And then I started to focus a little more intensely with one of her former PTs who had time to give to me. So Marika had to oversee all the dancers. So I went to a specific therapist that I worked with a lot, and she was very dedicated and really into the challenge of figuring this out. And she sent me to get an MRI, and the MRI came back and it showed sort of junk in the hip and possibly a little tear, just some question marks going on in that hip. But nothing was saying this is the end of your career yet.
Right.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, I'll be fine. I just need to get through this. But that lasted.
Can I just
a long time.
This is important for, I think, for our audience to understand. At that point, you had your imaging study. The results came back. Who gave the results to you?
My orthopedist. Yeah.
And did he talk to you at all about the prevalence of labral tears in people who don't have hip pain? Right? On studies where we do MRI scans and people who are fine, and we see labral tears in their hips even though they're fine.
Yeah, and they mentioned a number of dancers in the company, New York City Ballet. They're like, oh, she has a labral tear. He has a labral tear. Her, him. They all have labral tears and they're all fine. So you can get through this with a labral tear. Just strengthen the muscles around the joint in a certain way. So it was.
So you didn't leave that experience of having the MRI scan feeling like you were damaged goods somehow. And
I mean, I was kind of nervous because of the pain I felt, but they didn't alarm me that. I definitely wasn't at the point where they thought I had cartilage issues.
Okay.
But deep down I was. But they couldn't see that on the MRI.
Yeah. And then at some point you made the decision to go to Colorado.
That's right. Yeah. Mark Philippon. I'd seen a couple of doctors and I loved all of them and they were super helpful. But he offered me a third option or a fourth option to what all the other doctors had. They said, I can do this. When we go into the hip, I can do this, or this, with what I see. And with Dr. Philippon, he was like, I can do this, or this. And I was like, I'm going to you because God knows what's going on in there and you have an extra tool. So I went to him, and he's amazing. And he said to me after the surgery that it was quite a bit more damage than he had imagined. And he said to me right away, he said, you will probably have another surgery on this hip. And I don't know when, but you will probably need another surgery eventually down the line. And it was a year later I needed that surgery. So,
do you feel like they were tuned into the emotional aspects, or the things that you were going through, having to deal with this as a professional dancer, and what you were going through emotionally? Did you feel that? Or
I have to say, I mean, I met these doctors along the way, and they were some of the most empathic people that I could have ever hoped to meet. And I mean, they were very, very busy, but they also made me feel like I could reach out anytime. And my physical therapist was like 24/7 on call for anything I needed. And she would research, all kinds of information she was a former dancer too. So she also understood, and she worked with dancers for the most part of her career. And she, as a dancer, loved a challenge. And this was a challenge for her to help me figure this out. So,
do you think your providers had a handle on, or did they communicate with you about what you must have been going through more broadly as a result of, there's this like very clinical focus here, the pain, the procedures, the imaging, but did you get the sense that they acknowledged what you were going through personally, and how this sort of the threat that this represented to you or presented to you in your career?
I don't think that they really mentioned it to me. It wasn't like a subject that we spoke about, because they were definitely not into discussing with me the end of my career. That was not an option, because they knew that that was going to be how I would have the chance to recover. If I was going to recover, it would be because I believed that I was not going to end my career. I mean, literally, Dr. Philippon said, I know you're going to make an excellent recovery because you're doing the work that I'm prescribing. And you are you're a yes person. You're a yes person. And I know you're going to do well. And my ballet teacher, when I was a kid, said the same thing. I know you're going to make it because you don't understand the word no. And that rang true. I mean, I'd succeeded ultimately in everything that I applied myself to. I had my surgery with Dr. Philippon. I got to the end of my career at New York City Ballet. I had another year of touring of my new contemporary projects. I had made not even just the one project, but I did 2 other projects that year of this new work that were my own productions after I left New York City Ballet. So I did 3 productions of touring and performing. Then I couldn't walk at the end of that year. And then I had to have the hip replacement. And I had that at NYU Langone with Dr. Roy Davidovich. And within 6 weeks, I was at the bar and I was doing baby ballet, and I've been out of pain since. And I had rehearsal yesterday for another project I'm doing, and I'm 55. So
you're still dancing
to a degree.
Yeah,
not like my ballet dancers here, but I have a project coming up that I'm excited about it, and it fits where I am in my life right now. It fits what I'm focused on as a woman, and
that's great.
So, yeah.
That's great.
How did you know, being someone who obviously is an endurance coper, how did you know when too much was too much?
That was hard. That was really hard.
Yeah.
I did learn quick. I mean, I was never a person that danced through pain like other dancers I know who danced through serious pain. I knew when enough was enough, and I didn't want to damage myself stupidly beyond what I could do. That was just who I was as a dancer. That said, I was also trying to get to the finish line with this pain. So I think some kind of mental something kicked in where it was like, you know where to go, you know where to pull back. And it was really like riding a wild horse, kind of. And I did have help with my PT, Michelle. And she was like, okay, if you're feeling pain like this, you're doing too much, to this degree. Let's pull back a little bit. So I was really trying to navigate it with her help, mostly to get to the finish line of my career. After the surgery, I had basically a year after I had the tear surgery with Dr. Philippon. I had a year before my retirement date was set. And then, so I needed to get to that. Then after that, I had a whole list of my own projects, and I never imagined I would have another surgery. But then ultimately after those projects, it was like, you're done. When my husband was carrying me home at the end of a day, I was like, I think I'm done. And no matter what, I have to surrender to what is going on.
Right.
We have a person here that, had been flying, had been moving in ways that most people never will experience in their life.
Yeah.
And the joy and the freedom involved with that. And all of a sudden, here you are clunking along, trying to walk on crutches.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that had to be like going to movement jail or something,
Literally it was.
Yeah. And how did that affect you emotionally? And just because, everything that stimulates your sense of well-being and health and movement and all these things is just taken away, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't move. So just, could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, in ballet and other things in life, there's a stigma with a woman who ages, and I was in my mid 40s. And I'd outlasted most of my colleagues or any dancer in New York City Ballet to make it to age 47, which was very rare. But yeah, that ending, the ending of, you'll never be able to do this again. You'll never be able to lift your leg with a straight knee to the back to a certain level again, ever. And letting it go. Yeah. Among other things.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And jumping was quickly out of my repertoire. So, which was one of my strengths for a long time. And yeah, I felt ashamed that I felt like I failed, because I had to give it up. I had to stop. And because I had again believed myself into being kind of a superhero, that I could do this on stage every night and people like it and I have the best time and I get to work hard the next day. And then you have to take that superhero cape off and the shield and the crown and all the accoutrement, and
Yeah.
Wonder Woman's done. Woman's done. So, but then again, just like when my teacher said with the cast, this was a limitation that came in front of me. What are the opportunities? So I faced that again from when I was 12 and now I was 47. Where are the opportunities for me? How can I develop myself in a different way? And so I kept trying. I started to learn how to teach. I produced these programs. I went up for this job. Lots of different things.
We were talking before about your experience working with your physical therapist and other healthcare providers. That partnership you had was really important. And I'm wondering if there's anything you want to tell healthcare providers who are treating people who have injuries that are threatening their livelihood or their self-perception. Can you think of anything you'd want them to know based on your experience?
I think my relationship with Michelle, my physical therapist, Michelle Rodriguez, was always filled with humor, always. And this kind of quest for flexibility and up here, and let's try this. And so it wasn't hard answers. It wasn't hard energy. It was soft, flexible, light. And she tried to find ways to keep me free from the strain and stress, I think. And I mean, that was naturally our rapport anyway, but I think that with any other person, I don't know if I would have had as good an outcome. We did have a history before because I'd worked with her over years. So that also helped. She was a kind of a friend. And I could confide in her. I felt safe with her. I think that was a big, big thing.
Yeah, I think it is particularly devastating for performers and dancers, but also so relatable to so many people who have injuries that prevent them from doing the things they love or, affect their job or, so I think that's one of the things that was so wonderful about the documentary is that people who are not dancers could even understand and relate to your experience.
That was the best surprise gift that I got out of the film was that this became a film for much more important to non-dancers, I think. I mean, dancers, I think, saw it, of course, but I got more feedback from non-dancers and people at a certain age in their life when they were thinking about retiring from, whatever they're teaching or whatever they're doing. Somebody had a, issue with their body, or they lost something in their life, a person or something, and just letting go. It became a bigger topic, which I was so happy about. It wasn't just a ballerina's sad story. It was a life thing. I met Dr. Ruth Westheimer at this time in my life at an event, and she loves dance. And I said, oh, I just, we used to listen to you all the time when I started at the school. And she said, oh, what are you doing now? And I said, well, I just retired from the ballet. She goes, oh, no, dear. Don't retire. You just rewire. And I was like, I am never going to forget that. So, yeah.
That's great.
That's also appropriate when we talk about pain, because we say a lot to our patients when we're educating them about how much of pain is actually in the brain. And in order to start seeing things differently and move differently and behave differently, you have to rewire a little bit up there, right? So that's a very appropriate comment, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, in your case too, it was not just going through a phase of a hip pain problem, but how this, connected back to your childhood, the scoliosis, how that impacted you psychologically. But also, as we've discussed, sort of coming to the end of a phase of your life that had been incredibly important in working your way through it. So this idea of managing a disability, if you want to call it that, a disability, is, requires more than just a physical focus. It requires a sense of reassurance. It requires a reorientation of the pain experience. It requires good skilled physical care, good surgery if necessary, and then a way forward out of that, as what you were told, requires rewiring, not retiring.
Yeah.
So, that to me is the arc of your story, and I'm glad we're able to capture it. So
there was one thing I thought about as well, was that I realized through this that not only was dance my vocation and my love, but it also at certain points in my life was a crutch, because like I said before, it was something where I could reserve myself away from things that I didn't really want to deal with in life. I really wanted to commit myself 100% to this thing where I could live in this world. So having to come to terms with realizing that the crutch aspect of my career, and no longer having that, because dance had been sort of, when I was 3, sort of a pacifier for my energy. It pacified me. And I thought, what am I going to do when I don't have that as my pacifier? So it took me way back into this need for this release of energy. What am I going to do when I don't have this to release my energy? So that was really big to learn. And the other thing was getting to this point, building up my network outside of my usual suspects. So I built up this team of choreographers and other dance artists and I took a class that was a little bit more of a therapeutic ballet class after I'd had the surgery. So I built a new network of friends, which gave me a life that was different from the life I knew. So I had a new community where I was safe and I could be new Wendy. And they were hugely important to me in making me feel safe in this new place of wherever I go, I'm going from here, because I went from there to here. And now I'm going from here where I felt very nurtured emotionally. It wasn't this ballet world of failure and you're broken. It was like, I'm better and I'm trying new things with this energy. So that was huge, was the community that I built up around myself of different people that took me out of the world that I was in, where that headspace was, and I had a new headspace.
Yeah, that is so important. I'm glad you said that, because I hear from my patients sometimes that there's this silver lining about an injury, which at first they had a very hard time adjusting to, but it allowed them to open up to other things and maybe do things they didn't think they could do. So turning a negative into a positive again, right? Which is an important part of your story. Yeah. But thank you.
But, in order for that step to occur, just from a clinical perspective, right, it's important for providers to understand that the way we communicate with patients about their physical problem and about the impact of that problem on their ability to do what they do every day, their living, their job, so on and so forth, really matters in allowing patients to redirect. Because you're right. I mean, there's a certain point, denial is not a river in Egypt. You're not going to be a dancer forever. You're not going to do whatever forever. And the research is supporting that the way providers interact with patients can facilitate that transition, that leads to recovery, that leads to regrowth and moving in a positive direction, as opposed to coming sort of to the end of the rope and I'm broken and I'll never be better again and I'm depressed, and it just devolves into this train wreck of disability. And that the interactions we have with patients really do matter in setting the stage for that to open up and move in a new direction. Yeah,
a rebirth that's different. Yeah. You can change your reality of thinking with just how you think.